Hi, this is Jack Neville, and you're listening to the Two Furs Angling Podcast. I'm here with my co-host Matt Kleiber from Puget Sound Fly Company. This podcast is brought to you by Puget Sound Fly Company, a brick-and-mortar fly shop located in Tacoma, Washington. For orders, please call 253-472-2420. They mail all across the United States. And Two Furs Angling, a Washington-based fly fishing guide company with the idea to not only help you catch fish, but teach you how to be a better angler. For booking, please email me, Jack, at twofursangling@gmail.com. That's TWOFIRSANGLING@gmail.com. Two Furs Angling Podcast is here to help all anglers, regardless of style. We bring you up-to-date product information, interviews with industry professionals, tips and tricks on setting up your gear, fun fishing stories, and knowledge at no charge to you, the angler. This is the Two Furs Angling Podcast, episode 4. I'm here with Matt Kleiber today, my co-host, and we're going to talk a little bit about a bunch of different things, really. We're going to dig in to our recent fishing trip. We did some bass fishing over on the east side of the state on a little river over there. And then we're going to talk a little bit about, do you share your fishing spot with people, or do you keep it a secret? Do you share that information? What if it's your buddy's spot? We'll talk a little bit more about that later on today. So first off, let's dig in. So what was that, last Tuesday, right?
Yeah, Tuesday
we went
to
over
Thursday.
there. Yep. So we went over there on Tuesday night and did some camping, and then we got up super early. Not too early though. So we believed that our float was going to be around 3 miles, right?
Yeah.
So we went into it thinking that we were going to do basically like a real short 3 mile float, and we're talking about it at the campground, and we're like, yeah, we're going to do this really short 3 mile float, no big deal, and we'll do that, and it'll be perfect. Like, we'll anchor up a bunch, and it'll be a super mellow float, right? Or at least that was my idea. Yeah. And what time did we put on? We put on at 9? Yeah, exactly. So we put on at 9, and we launch, me and Stu. Our buddy Stu and his kid is who we're fishing with. So it's me and Matt in my raft. Stu and his son James are in his drift boat. So we launch. Me and Stu run the shuttle back down. It's only it's probably like a 17-minute drive or so to run the shuttle one way. So it's not. It doesn't seem unreasonable that it could be a shorter float, because the road didn't follow. Kind of runs all the way around, kind of like a big loop. So it was believable that the float itself would be much shorter than the drive. So we do that. We set off. Immediately, me and Matt get in the boat, and we look over on the right-hand side, and there's this really big rock wall. Big boulders, really. Like, it had to be man-made.
Yeah.
So there's a big man-made rock wall on the far right side, and we're on the left side. So I row us over there. Matt, what was it, probably your second cast or something like that?
That was my first cast.
First cast, Matt hooks a little half-pounder, basically, like a 12-inch fish or something. So Matt hooks a 12-incher, gets it to the boat, obviously. You were fishing your 4-weight at that time?
Yeah.
So we started out the day, Matt's fishing his 4-weight Trout LL. What line are you fishing? You're fishing that airflow, right?
Exceed.
Floating line?
Yeah.
So he's fishing an airflow floating line. And what was the fly? I don't remember what your fly was.
That was the first one was the sparkle minnow, the gold and copper sparkle minnow, which they loved.
Yeah, they did. In that first hole in particular, we took our time and kind of went through, because we think it's a 3 mile float. So we're taking our time.
We were definitely we were anchoring up in every
we
little
we
spot.
We were anchoring up
spot.
just going slow through this. Because in our head, we're like, dude, we got pretty much all day. We could anchor here all day, and then we think it's only like an hour and a half or 2 hours to float to the end. So we're like, dude, we can anchor here as long as we want. Like, as long as there's fish here, let's stay here, is our thought process. So we start, just going down a little bit, and we're going slow. Matt's hooking fish. Stu's son is fishing behind him. Stu's rowing, and he was throwing like a real light, ultra light spinning rod with these little, what do you even call those?
Blue
Rooster
fox?
tails? Or no, they're not really blue foxes, because a blue fox is almost like a vibrax, right?
Then it'd be the rooster tails. That
Yeah, I think you call them rooster tails. Anyways, just a little cylinder with a little Colorado blade, and then it's got a treble hook with some feathers on it. So we're not that great at gear fishing, so we don't even know what trout lures are even called. But so he's throwing those in. He probably hooks 3 or 4 out of there, I bet.
Yeah.
How many did you get? You probably got 5 or 6 out of there.
Yeah.
That's where we hooked a lot of fish in that first hole. And then basically I get bored. Which it normally happens really quickly for me.
Yes, it does.
Yeah, so I'm like, hey, let's move. Like, I'll row and we'll move. And I didn't hook anything. No, I did hook one and lost it, but I didn't do that much like heavy fishing in that hole. I was just kind of like throwing a big white panfish pattern, because Matt's railing them while I'm doing that. Just totally showing me up. And so I'm throwing in there, get a couple follows, and then we decide that we're going to move down. So I pull anchor, and we start floating down, and Matt's casting and stripping, kind of hitting the banks, really, is what we're doing at this point. It's still kind of early in the morning. It's probably, I don't know, it's probably 70 degrees by then. So
yeah,
it was pretty hot that day. So we're casting, stripping, hitting the banks, kind of floating down. Matt's picking up fish here and there. We anchor up at a couple other rock walls along the way. It's kind of like the Yakima. There's a lot of, like the upper Yakima and like the canyon. It's a lot like that, where there's kind of like rock walls and stuff like that are man-made, that they've kind of like cut out, so along roads and stuff like that. So there's definitely sections like that, which is kind of what we're aiming for, because we're fishing for smallmouth bass, and they like structure. So we're kind of just looking for any structure, because a lot of this river is really like grassy on the bottom. So we're looking for anything that these bass are like holding behind. Because this time of year, this is a Columbia tributary, so the main stem Columbia, basically a bunch of really big bass that live in the main stem run up the river and spawn. So you're catching them on their way up to go spawn. And then there's a bunch of little ones in there that are just kind of permanently in there. That's where they live. Or they could be fish getting ready to turn and burn back out to the Columbia, like they were, were born last year, and they're kind of just hanging out in the Columbia system until they get big enough to, head out into the main stem. Because obviously, main stem Columbia is going to be where all the little shad fry are, pretty much anything. I mean, the amount of bait fish that we saw was just crazy. There were
that was insane.
Huge schools of bait fish. So it totally makes sense why there would be so many of these bass in that stretch. So we're floating down and we're fishing. Matt's still picking up fish pretty consistently. Not, it's not like crazy. We're not like, it's not every cast or anything, but every 30 minutes or so, Matt hooks into one. So we're doing pretty good. And then we start to get down. It becomes a little more farmlandy, a little bit wider and a little bit less features. Stu's kid, James, he's hooking into fish pretty good too. He hooks a couple big ones as we get down further, which was definitely cool. He was real excited about that. And by big, I mean they're probably like 3 pounds or something like that. They were decent sized fish. I mean, a couple like that were closer to 5. And so as we go down, we switch. Matt wants to row a little bit, so Matt gets behind the sticks. And I was scared for my life, I think you could have fallen asleep and we would have got down safe, but Matt behind the sticks, you never know what's going to happen.
That's true.
Yeah,
That's
exactly.
true.
Next thing you know, we're doing 360s and stuff all over the river.
Hey, but I found structure and I looked over and I saw it.
Yeah, so
I rowed back across.
Yep. So we're floating down, and me and Matt, we're about to hit this bridge. Me and Matt both kind of go, "Hey, it looks pretty good." Like right over in that right, there's a big split, big Y in the river, and we're obviously going to take the left hand side because that's the main channel. That's where all the water is going. So we decide that we're going to take that side. So we do, and we head down that way, and we get kind of just underneath the bridge. I cast in kind of 3 pretty big size, I would guess 3-pounders or so, kind of follow but don't eat. We're like, oh man, that's brutal, and we get just below it, and I'm fishing my 591 Sage X, which for those who don't know is just a 5-weight basically that they add a fighting butt, full Wells grip, and a little bit bigger guides. So I'm throwing that with I think they designate it as a 5.6 Cortland line, but I would say it's a pretty spot on 5-weight. Cortland line, intermediate, really badass line that I use out in the Sound a lot. But that kind of gets me down just a little bit, and then I'm throwing this big white panfish. And by big, I mean like it's probably a 3-inch pattern, real big flat pattern. Cast out, start stripping, and then I feel a tug while I'm stripping, and I can tell like right away. I'm like, oh, this is a big fish, You get that feeling sometimes when you strip set it, and you're like, oh, that thing didn't move at all when I just pulled this line. Like it went the other way. This thing is big, And I'm fishing with my Click Paul Galvin reel, which has like it's even worse than most Click Paul reels. How little drag it has. Like there's no tension really. Mm-mm. Like it'll backlash on you. It's the only fly reel that I've seen that'll backlash on you, bad too. And so it starts running, and I'm like, oh man, and we're in, a lot of the river's really slow, but we're in like decent current here. And so this thing's running, and I'm like, ooh, this is gonna be fun, And so I'm fighting it, and getting it to turn, and it's running to one side of the boat, running to the other side of the boat. Does I think like 2 jumps out of the water. Anyways, we get probably 5 minutes into this fight or whatever, and the thing's about ready to come in. So I start reeling it, and get it netted, and that's kind of when we realized we were like, whoa, this is a big fish. This is bigger than we thought it was, So it was probably a solid 6-pound smallmouth. I mean, that was a good sized fish.
Yeah, it was.
If you're watching the YouTube video, we'll have a photo of that, and some of the other bass that we hooked on there. But yeah, so we get a nice bass in the boat, that's for sure. So I'm pretty stoked. I'm a little bit, tired from from landing that thing too. It's really hot out, and we're like, man, like we got to be getting reasonably. It's probably about 1:00 by this point. We're like, man, we got to be getting reasonably close toward the end of this whole float, because it's a short float. And so Stu, our buddy, comes down, and he takes a look at the map basically shortly thereafter. And he's like, we're about 1/4 of the way in. And we launched at 9 that morning, and it's now 1:00. And we're like, what do you mean we're 1/4 of the way in? Like, we're like, that doesn't make any sense. This is only supposed to be like a 3-mile float, man. We got to at least covered, 3 miles by now. We thought it was around the next bend. And, so we're like, oh my gosh, like what? We better start hauling ass to get out of here, man. Otherwise, we're going to be pulling out in the dark. Like we can't be doing this speed the whole way. So we start to go fast, basically. I'm starting to forward row. We're not anchoring anymore. Like we're just moving, basically. So we're moving down river. Matt's hitting the banks. We're picking up a couple fish here and there. And we kind of lose Stu and James. They're ways behind us, probably like a bend around or whatever. So we finally, this area is totally just farmland out in eastern Washington. So there's no trees, there's no shade, there's no comfort on this river. You're just kind of exposed. If there's wind, you're going to feel the wind. If there's sun, you're going to be sitting out in the hot sun all day. So we finally find some trees, and we're like, Matt's like, hey, we should go sit under that tree. And I'm like, I am 100% in agreement with you there. So we forward row on over. We anchor up underneath this tree, and we are living it up. This is the first time that we've got some comfort all day. Because that sun, man, when that sun is on you all day, it's brutal. That was a rough day. So we anchor up, and we're hanging out. We're drinking our. Thank God for my cooler, man. So I got an Engel 35 cooler that I keep in my raft. That was thankfully keeping what we thought was 3 days worth of vitamin waters. That turned out to be an afternoon of vitamin waters because we are chugging these things to try and stay cool. Like and my Engel does a good job of keeping it pretty cool, even though it's sitting out in that sun like that. But so we're chugging those, and they finally come around the bend, and Stu meets up with us, and we're like, dude, we got to be above halfway. Like, we gotta be halfway, right? Me and Matt are sitting there discussing it, and we're like, yeah, like for sure. There's no way that we're still like, below halfway. Like it's like 2:00 by now in the afternoon. We're like, we got to be pretty far in this float.
Well, we pushed. We hard.
We were
so we covered some ground.
We were moving. Yeah, because keep in mind, this water, it's not like forward rowing on the OP. Like there's no movement in this water. Like it's barely moving at like your grandpa's walking pace. So we were forward rowing, but we were probably moving at normal river speed. Like we weren't zooming down the river or anything. So I forward row a bunch, and we get down to there, and Stu finally comes around the bend and meets up with us, and we take a look again at the online maps, and we realize that we are about dead on halfway. And me and Matt are like, this is brutal,
When's this ever gonna end? Is how that felt. It was like, okay,
it did, yeah.
Caught a lot of fish, got beat up by the sun. Let's go back to camp, drink a bunch of water, have a beer, call it a happy day. Move on.
And if I'll tell you right now, if that float ended right there, I would have been one happy camper, dude.
I would have
gone back to the campsite, made some burgers, and just been happy, you know. And not have felt beat up at all. That would have been like a great float. I would have been like, let's get up and do this tomorrow before we head out, Yeah. So me and Matt are like, okay, let's start moving. Let's start getting some miles covered. You fish out of the front while I row, and we'll cover some ground, and you'll just cast and straight. We won't fish it real heavy, but we'll still be fishing the whole way, basically. That's our plan. So Matt starts fishing it, starts throwing. I'm forward rowing. We're drifting down. We're picking up some good fish. Now we're kind of getting into the lower sections. Matt picks up, pretty damn good one. Basically, hooks into on his 4-weight, probably 3-4 pounder.
Yeah.
Nice fish. Jumps once for him. Gets it in the boat. I net it. Badass little fish. And I'll tell you right now, smallmouth don't get credit for how hard they fight. Not in Washington.
No.
People just don't fish that much for bass in Washington. And if they do, it's usually lake fishing. Guys just don't go that much for smallmouth. A little bit in Lake Washington, guys will fly fish for smallmouth up there. So that's a little bit more of a thing, I guess I'd call it. Like I think the Seattle shops talk about that a little bit more. We don't hear about it as much down here. There's not that many lakes in Washington that have really large populations of smallmouth. A lot of times it's largemouth. A lot of the big reservoirs, a lot of the big man-made reservoirs have smallmouth because they're kind of like rockier and stuff. They have a little bit better structure for them. Whereas a lot of our natural lakes are like really grassy and weedy and kind of get a ton of grass and lily pads and stuff all summertime. So, bass fishing is reasonably popular, especially as summer steelhead numbers are kind of dropping. It seems to be getting more and more popular. I actually saw a really cool shirt the other day that said "Save Wild Steelhead, Fish for Bass." I was like, that's an awesome shirt. So Matt hooks into a really good one. This thing fights really hard. Definitely helps that we were fishing a 4 and a 5 weight the whole time. I did bring an 8 weight, and I also brought a 6 weight, which is a really stout 6 weight, so it's more of like a 7 weight. But I didn't feel like I needed it. Did you?
I mean, not really. It was just fun on the bigger ones too, because especially with the 4 weight.
Oh yeah.
And it's 8'6".
Yeah, yours is
So
that trout out. Yeah.
right. So I mean, it got put to the test a few times, and it was amazing. I mean, I love catching big fish on
Oh, on light
light.
gear,
Yeah.
dude, I know that thing. That 6 pounder, that thing kicked my butt on that 5 weight because I was trying to lift it and turn it and control it like I normally would. I think if I had hooked that thing with my 8 weight, it'd have been like a 2 minute fight at most.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it was like when we went up to that other lake in Eastern Washington
Yeah,
and did bass. I mean, we only fished 8 weights.
yeah, totally. And
So
it's just to me it's not as fun. I would like we were talking about this before we went live. I would rather hook into a big fish. And I'm always fishing barbless, so it's always gonna pop out after if I lose it. The hook is. And I would rather hook into a big fish and fight it and lose it on a light rod than fight it on an 8 weight and land it in 2 seconds. I mean, don't you agree?
100%. It just makes it enjoyable. I that you can really feel the power on that light tackle of those fish.
Yeah, no, I think that's the most, at least for me, that's the most fun way to fish for them. I mean, I think I have more lightweight rods than I do anything else.
Well, and I just put a stouter, tippet on there. So
Yeah,
I'll do like a 2X
100%.
on there.
Yeah, yeah.
And
That's something that people don't talk about enough is you can run a heavy tippet on a light rod. I fish out in the sound with a 2 weight all the time. 7'6" 2 weight. That's my favorite cutthroat rod. Yeah, so I fish a 2 weight out in the sound most of the time. That's what kind of my go-to, and I fish that with a little single hand Skagit line that's an intermediate. It's actually one of the prototype OPST ones, but mine's integrated. They didn't actually ever come out with the integrated one, but I don't think they have yet, right? In an intermediate, I think they just have the full floater in their integrated series. But anyway, so it's an integrated one. It's intermediate. SA makes a really good one called the Spay Light. There's a bunch of different options. Rio makes a pretty good single hand Spay line too. All of them are great, really. I mean, like, it's a pretty, what it really comes down to with any of those lines is how thin the running line is for me, and then kind of like basing that off of durability, because once you get really thin running line, that's not very durable generally. But anyway, so I fish that a bunch. That's my favorite. That allows me to get turnover still on a little bit bigger flies, but I run 2X on a 2 weight.
yeah.
And it's not a big deal. I mean, especially because, so keep in mind, both of us run fluorocarbon a lot, because I think it's worth it, first of all, because first, it sinks. So if I'm fishing a streamer or something like that, I'm definitely fishing fluorocarbon because it's not impeding the sink of the fly. And then the second reason is it's non-UV reflective. So you can get away with fishing bigger stuff. I can
Right.
fish 2X, and it's at a minimum as visible as, I would say, I don't know, 3X, something
Yeah.
like that. It's probably at least maybe 1 to 2 sizes bigger in monofilament. It's probably about equivalent. Could be even bigger, honestly, but that's a pretty safe bet. So for me, I would rather fish fluorocarbon if I'm fishing streamers anyways, and I have no issue going to bigger stuff with fluorocarbon, and I don't seem to notice leader shy fish. I don't feel like I hook less fish now by running a little bit bigger stuff.
No, not in the sense of, any sound fishing,
Yeah.
bass fishing, things
No.
like that. You don't really have to worry
Trout.
about exactly
Yeah.
trout.
Not if I'm fishing a streamer, I don't notice it, or nymphing even.
Right,
Yeah.
exactly.
So for me, that's what I do. And I'm really bad at, like, this. I know some people, every time that they land a fish, cut off their fly, retie their knot, cut off a solid 4 inches that could have been like abraded by the fish's mouth. I'm terrible at that. I never do that. I just throw my fly back in.
I don't think I've ever had an issue that
I've
noticed, at
I've
least.
probably lost maybe like 1 or 2 fish that way, but that's about it at most. And both those times I was probably running too light of tippet anyways, in my opinion. So I tend to fish bigger stuff. That's just my own thing that I do. I know a lot of people who catch a lot of fish fishing really light tackle too, though. But I don't want to lose a fish once I've hooked into it due to my knot or to my tippet. You know what I mean? Like, it's one thing if it jumps and it shakes my hook, that's fine, But if it busts off, then that's a mistake on my part, you know what I mean? Like, I should have fished something bigger. I would rather lose it fighting it, than just have it bust off. So so I was fishing probably like 1X, honestly, that whole time. Fluorocarbon, I think it's 12-pound Seaguar fluorocarbon, which is great stuff. No, you know what it actually was? I was fishing the Cortland 1X fluorocarbon, that new stuff that Sandstrom gave me. Gary Sandstrom's the Cortland rep. So I was fishing that stuff with my Cortland line because I told Gary that I would fish it. So that stuff was awesome. It did a good job. It was super easy to knot. It does burn a little bit easily, like when I tied the knot. Like, you gotta get it really wet, but it was good stuff. So I landed that fish. For me, I would say I wouldn't fish it with anything bigger than a 6-weight. That particular area for those smallmouth. I was pretty happy with my 5-weight. I probably would have brought my 4-weight along had I known that there would be such a substantial amount of smaller fish in comparison to the larger fish. Like, we only hooked into 3 bigger migratory fish, whereas we hooked into 15 probably smaller fish. So I would say it's more of a 4-weight game. At least I would consider those fish 4-weight fish. Honestly, I was kind of like, man, I wish I had my 2-weight right now for a lot of that fishing. That would have been a blast. Would I have broken my 2-weight? Probably.
Yes. Yeah.
Especially if I had hooked into one of those 3-pounders, or especially if I had hooked into that 6-pounder. That's something to keep in mind too. There's no way that I would have landed that 6-pound fish probably on anything lighter than what I had it on.
That was a big fish.
Maybe could have landed it on the 4-weight. It was borderline. Like, I had real issues lifting up the fish's head for Matt to net it. It just didn't want to move, and it was a lot for a 5-weight.
Well, and if you think about it, the river kind of adds to it because
Oh,
it has
100%.
that current, and it's definitely using it to its advantage.
Well, and bass aren't like trout. Bass are really tall in comparison to trout. So when they flip sideways in that current, and it was moving pretty good in that spot, they're gonna take up a lot of water that's pushing them downstream, and so it's gonna bust off some line off of your reel if you're on the reel at that point. That's for sure. And it'll do it fast. You'll be surprised. And it's not necessarily that fish is running so fast. It's that he's heading kind of a angle, basically. He's kind of heading at a 45-degree downstream and away from you. So he's got that current behind him that's pushing him downstream, and he's just swimming straight sideways, And so it's double the amount of line that he would normally take in a lake or something like that.
Right, yep.
Because in a lake, that helps too, is that in a lake, normally bass are like really bulldoggy. They kind of like dive down. In a river, you can't do that.
No.
You can't go down. Not in that river. It's only like 3 feet deep the whole way across. Obviously, there's plenty of rivers that go
Lots
really
of holes
deep.
and back
Yeah,
eddies
exactly.
and
Yeah.
stuff like that.
But no, I mean, this section is like basically, I would guess it was probably 4 feet deep all the way across. Very, very shallow and wide. So it definitely ran on us. But I've especially talking to like George Cook and those guys, I find that we are kind of the outliers in that sense. Like, we tend to fish a lot lighter gear than most people. Like, I was always pushing George to make a 4-weight with a fighting butt, because they got down to a 5-weight with that Sage X, and I was like, it'd be really cool if you guys had a 9-foot 4-weight with a fighting butt. and a little bit oversized guides. That would be badass, especially if you made like a coastal quick shooter in a 4-weight. That'd be the best Puget Sound rod for coastal cutthroat that there is.
Yeah.
That would be my all around go to. And George would always be like, "Yeah, but we'd sell like 5 of them to you guys, and that would be it." And he's probably right. Most people, at least most people when they were coming in the shop, were like, "Do you think a 6-weight is enough for a cutthroat? Am I going too light? Do I need to bring out my 8-weight?" And I was like, "Look, I'm using a 2-weight out there, and if it's real windy out today, I might bring out my 4-weight, like." And that's just, for me, that's just a more fun day.
Yeah, it comes down to preferences.
It totally does. There's a lot of people, and honestly, I think the number one thing it comes down to is casting ability. If you can cast, you can get away with fishing. Like a nil can cast. That dude can throw a line like
90-foot cast on a 2-weight Echo glass or...
Dude,
yeah.
Don't even get me started on that story. This guy sandbagged me out of an Echo glass, okay?
So cool.
Yeah, we'll tell this quick side note story. So, because it's kind of on the topic of gear. So Troy, the Sims rep in our area, he's also the Echo fly rods rep, came down, and there's a long tradition of the Raging River sales people and Anil kind of having bets pretty much every time. It started with Eric Neufeld. They used to have push-up competitions back in the day to win things. They would wager whatever, lunch or something like that on push-up competitions. And when I first interned, that was kind of, Troy was kind of the main guy, just kind of starting to be, I don't know how many years he had been. A couple of years he had been kind of the main guy for our shop in particular. He was still the sub rep in our area. And he had a couple, I think he probably had 2 years of push-up competitions with Anil. Pretty close. It was always real fun watching those two go at it. And then, what was that, last year, I think?
Mm-hmm.
He had a Echo Glass 2-weight that he was showing us. And it was like, screw the push-up competition. Let's go. We're having a casting competition. So it was a 2-part competition, right? We had accuracy and distance.
Yes.
Because that was, Troy knew he was a little bit in over his head with Anil in a distance competition, but Troy's a pretty damn accurate caster. That guy's that guy's a Yakima trout fiend. So he knew he could probably take him in the accuracy. So that was kind of his plan, right? Was that he'd probably win the accuracy, and then Anil might win the distance, and then it would kind of work out, right? Basically off of that. That was his goal. So we do the accuracy part first. We're all casting, me, Matt, Anil, and Troy. All do our cast. I think Troy won the accuracy, which was obviously his plan. So he wins the accuracy part, and then we get to the distance part. And Anil throws out a pretty good cast, first one. And I was like, oh, man, he hawked on that one. Because it's pretty windy out that day, too. I should keep, add to this. There was a good breeze right into your face, which a 2-weight is not the ideal line to there's kind of two schools of thoughts though, like because it's a 2-weight line, it's so thin, it's kind of easier to cut through the wind versus like an 8-weight. An 8-weight would be thicker, it gets blown a little bit more. But the problem, especially with a glass rod, is that you can't create any line speed. Like your line is literally moving at basically a walking pace. Like you can watch the line the whole time, like just go out and unravel, especially with Anil casting like a legitimate, probably 80 something feet on that first cast. So I'm like, oh man, he hucked. Troy throws out a pretty good one. I think it was like best of 3 for the distance. Troy throws out a pretty good one. And I was like, man, this is some tough competition. Matt throws out a pretty good one, and then I throw one, and I think I get second to Anil. And I'm like, ooh, he beat me out by probably like 2 feet or something like that on that first cast. We get to the second one, and it's I think we were doing an elimination, right? Yep. So Matt's off now. So I think Troy threw the first one, decent one. Then Anil throws one, and he beats out Troy a little bit. And I'm like, oh, but the wind blew a little bit in his face, so he didn't get the turnover. Like his leader didn't flip over, and so he lost a little bit of distance. And I was like, this is my chance, you know? So I huck a big one, and I probably beat him by maybe like a foot at most.
At most, yeah.
It was probably closer to 6 inches. So I beat him, though. And I like to talk shit a lot to Anil.
Yeah.
So I was giving it to him, talking about how he's an old man, he's past his prime, all sorts of stuff. You know, when the Padawan becomes the teacher. I had some pretty good lines for him that day. So that was my cast, right? And then so I throw a big one, you know, because now it's my turn to lead off. This is the last one, though. Whoever wins this one, because now I won one and Neil wins one. Whoever wins this takes the cake, right? So I throw a pretty good cast, and I feel pretty confident, and I'm giving him some crap. The wind dies for like 1 second, and he just shoots it and beats me by like 15 feet. Like just throws a huge one, like a legit. We were probably casting like 82 feet with our previous cast. Like we were all pretty close. Troy's pretty close to me. Like somebody's winning by like maybe 6 inches or a foot. Like it's all within, you know, a couple feet of each other. And then Anil just busts out like almost 100-foot cast, and I was like, oh, you were just sandbagging us the whole time, just giving us some false hope here, you know. It was brutal. So he won the Echo Glass that day, that's for sure.
He did. He definitely did.
So back to our original story. Yeah, so we were fishing pretty light tackle that whole day, catching lots of fish, which is, I mean, that's my favorite way to do it. I like catching them on real lightweight rods, for sure. Like
Definitely.
4-weight is probably my go-to for the most, unless I'm fishing steelhead or salmon. But 4-weight for most fisheries is kind of like my go-to rod, just because I like catching fish on. I've got a 4-weight Sage Foundation that I really like. You've got that LL that you really like.
Mm-hmm.
I really like my Sage Axe 5-weight. So I kind of tend to stay in that 4 or 5-weight size. So yeah, we're floating down, catching a bunch of fish on the 4-weights and stuff. Matt, you probably hook another big, probably 3-pounder. And at this point, it's probably 3:00 in the afternoon now. We put on at 9 that morning. It's probably been about 80 something all day. Pretty
hotter
good.
Hotter than that, dude. Way hotter than that.
Well, it was like upper 80s.
Yeah, I'd say like 90, 95, pushing maybe 100, because that was some heat. I mean,
that is 100% how it felt. Like on that, I think because we were so exposed. I mean, there were no trees, so we were in the sun that entire time, and you know, you're sitting on the raft and that sun's like reflecting. It was crazy, dude. I got sunburnt on the underside of my nose because I sprayed my face with the sunscreen pretty good.
Yeah.
But obviously I didn't get the underside of my nose. I wasn't like spraying sunscreen up my nose. And that was the only place on me that got burned, but it got burned bad. Like I was peeling the next day. I was like, oh my God, like the sun was brutal, dude. Like that's how you know it's bad, when it reflects off the water and burns the underside of your nose. Yeah. So we fished the whole day. Now I'm hauling. Like a couple times we flipped the boat around, you know, so that way my anchor's facing downstream, and I just started back rowing as fast as I could to get us through some dead sections. And so we're just forward rowing. And Matt had a great joke. You were talking about when you were in the Marines, they used to just tell you one more hill, and you were like, that's what this is, dude. This is just like the Marines all over again. Just one more bend. Just the next bend. It's going to be there. But it's never there.
It's never there. It's never ending.
Nope. You just keep suffering. Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
So that's what we do. We keep telling ourselves, so there's a marker. When we dropped off Stu's rig at the bottom, we noticed there is a float plane around the bend. right across from where our pullout is. And so we're just rowing fast now just to get out of here, because we're so done. It's like 4 o'clock and we're just hauling balls down
Over
this
it.
river. Yeah,
Over
we're just done fishing. And we got like 16, 17 fish for the day. Like, that's plenty of smallmouth bass for me. Especially when it's that hot. And now the wind's picking up because it's the east side of Washington and it's the afternoon. The wind always picks up in the east side in the afternoon. So we're just rowing fast to get out of there. And finally we hit the bend and we're like, oh, thank God. You know, like it's over. It's over. And so we row over there and we pull out. And we didn't know it at the time, but Stu texts me the next day and he goes, hey, I did the math, man. That was an 11-mile float that we did. And we thought it was like 3 miles.
the entire time.
We thought it was a legitimate 3-mile float, and this thing was 11 miles.
Yeah.
And this water had to be moving at like a 1 mile an hour pace. Like, it was dead. Like, this water was as slow froggy water gets.
Yeah.
There was no current moving us down the river, because an 11-hour float, even at a good pace, you know, on a good pace river, that would be a long day. I would consider that like a really legitimate full day float. You got to kind of push. You're not anchoring. You're not, you know, you're just floating. Like, 11 miles is a long stretch of water to cover. So we were definitely unprepared for 11 miles of river, and we're mentally not thinking that that's what we were doing that day. We even brought a grill to grill up some brats that we had in the cooler, and there was no pull offs for us to grill on, because I got a raft. You know, if I had an aluminum drift boat, we could have just, you know, grilled it in the drift boat. But so I got a raft, so. Yeah, we were waiting for a gravel bar to pull off on or something for us to grill these dogs on.
Can.
And yeah, I think it probably hit about 3 o'clock, and we were both like, okay, let's stop looking for a gravel bar. Let's just get the hell out of here. We'll make the dogs when we get back to camp. So we just forward rode our ass off to get out of there. That was a brutal float. That was a long day. That float was definitely not for the faint of heart or the unprepared.
Very, very true. Very true.
I would consider us fairly unprepared for that float. Thankfully, we had all those vitamin waters, man. Like, if I had only taken in the cooler what I thought we needed for the day, we would have been screwed.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. I finished like a gallon of water plus all those.
At least, dude. Yeah, I was chugging the vitamin waters, chugging regular water, just anything to stay hydrated. Spraying myself down constantly with the sunscreen. It was brutal. We got to camp that night, actually, speaking of sunscreen, and Stu's legs. He was wearing shorts that day and flip-flops. That guy's knees, they look like little lobster knees.
Yep.
I mean, he was neon red in the darkness. Yeah. That guy was like the open sign. He was glowing. It was brutal. But his kid suffered through it the whole time. James, he's a trooper.
He is.
He was pushing through, because me and Matt were talking about it, and we were both kind of over this whole trip. We were like, let's just get out of here. And I don't think I could have done that when he's probably 13. I think he is. He's in 8th grade, so he's 13 or maybe 14 by now. But yeah, there's no way I could have done that. I didn't have that level of commitment to suffering at that age. That's for sure.
Yeah, he's a trooper.
I
He
know.
definitely.
There were probably 8 or 9 times that me and Matt were like, we should just probably go swim right now, just while we're waiting, you know.
Yeah.
Cool off. Matt's feet were neon purple by the end of the day. They were so, you know, getting so sun exposed.
Well, I woke up the next morning and they were fine, so I don't know.
You weren't burnt at all.
Yeah, that was. I just kept.
I
applied twice.
Yeah, it was all that. All the fluids you were drinking kept you from getting burnt. Probably.
I want to drink a gallon that night.
Oh,
When
yeah.
we got back, I was just dying. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. No, that night, we ate like pigs too.
Yeah.
We were That was brutal.
We just kept eating.
Yeah. But that was our first camping trip, too. You had Matt bought this. What is it, a 6-man tent?
Yeah, it's a 6-man tent.
6-man North Face tent. And we were living like kings in this thing, okay? There's a vestibule on it. So for people who don't know, I'm 6'4". I'm a tall dude. I could stand up in this tent like it was nothing. Not even like the classic like shrug your shoulders and duck your head to keep from banging it off the ceiling. No, this thing like I could actually stand up in, and we had cots set up, and we had our little chairs and a little table in our vestibule. We were living the camping dream. I mean, this was glamping. This wasn't camping.
Well, especially compared to what we usually do, which is either sleep in a car or sleep in a 2-man tent and hate life.
Yeah, it is a lot of sleeping in the car out in Forks because we're not going to set up the tent because it's pouring down rain, and we're like, let's just sleep in the car, man. Which, for those who haven't slept in the front seat of a Toyota Tacoma, not the most comfortable thing. I'll tell you that much.
Nope.
That's for sure. And then I've got a little 2-man mountaineering tent, which is, it's awesome because the rainfly, sorry, not the vestibule, the rainfly on it is bomb proof. Like, it does an amazing job of keeping us dry. I mean, that one time when we went coho fishing, we could hear the rain. Like, we thought it was thunder. And the next morning, Stu, we went fishing with Stu that day. The next morning, we were talking to Stu. We got up and we're making coffee and stuff. And Stu's like, did you hear the rain before it came? And we were like, yeah. We didn't know what that sound was. We just heard this off in the distance. And we were like, is that like thunder? Like, what is that? Like, it woke me up from my sleep.
Mm-hmm.
And then all of a sudden, it just came over us. And it was like it was like a monsoon or something hitting the tent. Like, it was crazy. But so that's always kept us dry. So that's kind of like my tried and true tent, because that keeps us dry when it's like that. But I would say it's probably smaller than a queen size bed in there, and there's 2 fully grown men right next to each other, trying to, and all our gear is kind of in there too. It's long though, so there's space on at your toes and your head. But yeah, definitely that it was pretty stark contrast between my tent versus your ginormous 6-man tent.
Well, it only had 4 poles.
It did only have 4 poles,
so it wasn't too bad putting
no,
it wasn't. Didn't take as much time.
It doesn't have a fly. It's all one. It's a single wall tent, so it was pretty mellow to put together. Like, we didn't have to drape this giant rain fly over the top or anything. But there's no trees at that campground, so it did get really hot in the morning. Like, that sun started you were basically in a pressure cooker by the morning. Like, I felt like I was in the sun dome or something. It was crazy.
You were definitely up when the sun came
Yeah,
up.
you were definitely up when the sun came up. It started to get hot fast in there. So, yeah, so we were kind of living it up that night. We were hanging out. There were a lot of bugs, too. I didn't know about this before you told me about it, but there was no regular fires there. You couldn't have wood fires at this campsite, and we were talking about it, and there's kind of a big push right now for that, kind of across the board, to have wood fires, switching over to propane fires for the most part, for people to bring their own little fire pit that has a propane hookup, just so that way at the end of the night when you're done with your fire, you just turn it off. Just turn off the propane. Not a big deal. Basically eliminates the risk for, somebody starting a fire because they didn't put out their fire properly, which a lot of people don't. A lot of people don't put away their fire properly. I've seen people go to bed with basically a raging fire still going, at some of these campgrounds. So kind of understandable why the state might be leaning a little bit more toward that way. This one was a private campground, so they have the right basically to request that you do whatever they ask. And so they ask that you don't do a wood fire. Definitely an interesting thing, I think. And you were talking about, you probably think that more campgrounds are going to go that way in the future.
Well, I mean, it really does make sense. I know anybody who's gone camping is, as they're driving out on that Sunday morning or whatever, people are gone and there's fire raging and they have wood piled around the fire pit.
yeah.
I mean, that catches fire, spreads, and then you got,
You got
forest
problems.
fires.
Yeah,
And the
exactly.
drier these seasons are getting every year, I think they want to cut down on that,
Yeah.
risk chance of
Oh,
fire starting.
understandably so. There's definitely, at least in my lifetime, there's been a hell of a lot more forest fires in Washington State.
Yes.
I couldn't remember when I was a little kid times where it's always kind of been a thing in California, but I just didn't remember when I was a little kid so many fires. And now it seems like every summer when you go to the east side, you're pretty much guaranteed to have some smoky sunrises and sunsets,
Yep.
and that the air quality is going to be smoked out, basically. That it's going to be like you're hanging out next to a fire the whole time. So that's definitely interesting. We were talking about it, so we posted some photos on. I posted a photo of my big bass on Instagram, along with Matt's biggest bass for the day on Instagram. I know you posted some of your photos on Instagram. People, pretty much always, if you post a photo of a good fish on Instagram, they're gonna hit you up and say, "Hey, where'd you catch that fish? Give me your spot. Gimme." Basically, is the what people say. And there's kind of this assumed thing because you work at the fly shop that you kind of like people just assume that you kind of have to give them your spot, like that you have no secrets. You work at the fly shop, you can't keep secrets from us. You're supposed to give it up. But I know you definitely see it a little differently.
Yeah.
You like to keep secret spots. You like your privacy when you fish, and I think that's probably fair. That I think there are some spots that you should share. There are certain spots that are kind of like sacrificial lambs to get people into fishing, like Purdy, right? For
Yep.
example, Purdy is a really popular spot here in Washington State, specifically for cutthroat. And any given day that you drive by Purdy, you might see like 6 dudes out there fly fishing. And that's just kind of like a sacrificial spot. That's kind of where, when you get into cutthroat fishing, that's probably where you're going to go first. And then you're gonna kind of branch out. And your point is that you should find it yourself, right? You should find your own.
Well, I mean,
spots.
I guess it wouldn't be you should find it. I mean, people be like, hey, it was in this general area, you'd be like, oh, I'm out at the OP. So
Yeah.
people they go, okay, how many river, type thing. And they go,
Yeah.
it's got to be on one of these.
Yeah.
But going this specific hole, this specific spot, walk in right here, cast
with
this way.
fly.
And you're going, well, that takes the fun out of it. At least the way I look at it, it takes the fun out of figuring it out yourself.
Yeah.
And a lot of times people who tie their own flies, you get that gratification of switching that fly out. And then you're like, oh, I tied this one. And you throw that on and you go ahead and, you fish it and you catch a fish. And, I mean, it's, you go to your, and your buddies always ask, and they're always like, what river were you on? And it's hard to be like, oh, I was on this river, because then, he's going to tell his friend's going to tell his friend. And then I'm going to go up there next week and go fish it. And all of a sudden, all my buddies are in my hole.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh, hey, guys. And they're going, oh, well, this isn't your hole. And I'm like, well, I understand that. But I'm like, you guys wouldn't even know this existed if it wasn't for me letting you know.
Yeah. There's some people who are definitely like, there's a extent to it, though. You know what I mean? Like, there's some people who get crazy with it, and they're like, they caught one fish at Purdy yesterday, and they're like, oh, I can't. I was out in the Sound. You don't need to know my spot. And you're like, dude, you were out fishing at Purdy. Like, I saw the photo on Instagram. I saw the bridge right behind you. Like, you did a terrible job of hiding it.
The Italian restaurant right behind you.
Yeah, you got Massimo's sign like right there in your photo. You're standing next to it. Yeah, and you're like, dude, you did a horrible job of hiding where you were at, first of all. But secondly, everybody knows about that spot. So that there are spots that you should, kind of protect, because they really can't sustain large amounts of people fishing them.
Yep.
There's definitely a lot of spots that are like that, where it's like, hey, this is kind of like a little honey hole, but it can only handle like 2 dudes, 3 dudes consistently fishing it. And then there's other spots where you're like, hey, this can handle, this river or whatever, right? The Wainuchi or whatever can handle more people, you know?
Yeah,
So
exactly. Yeah.
it's not the end of the world if I talk about, that I fished the Wainuchi in November or whatever the hell it is,
Right. And that's kind of a more known
Yeah.
thing. It's closer to the
Yeah.
towns and
So,
cities.
so I would say, at least in my opinion, there are spots that you give up and there are spots that you don't,
Well, yeah, I mean, especially on main rivers, you're like,
Yeah.
oh, I mean, hey, just this stretch is
Yeah.
where I hooked into some
Yeah,
fish.
no, I'm with you there. I would say that you can tell somebody the river, and you could even tell them what stretch, but you shouldn't tell them what hole,
Right.
unless it's like for example, the Quileute, right? Like everybody fishes the chimney hole, and like if I tell you about the chimney hole, I didn't tell you any secret. You know what I mean?
It's
Like
on Google.
yeah, I told you the most popular spot in probably the entirety of Washington State for coho fishing.
You
So
can literally type it into Google and it'll pop up
I didn't.
that spot.
I didn't tell you anything secret there. So, but for the most part, yeah, I would say because there is right. Like there's a certain amount that I can tell you, and then there's a certain amount that you have to like earn. Like if I tell you, hey, go to this river at this exact flow on this time period stretch and float this stretch and fish this hole with this fly at this depth, and you're looking for this structure. Like I basically did the fishing for you. You just followed some instructions. You know what I mean?
Right,
Like,
you did the casting.
yeah, exactly. It's like I gave you the recipe. You know what I mean? Like you might have baked the cake, but it's not your cake.
Right.
Yeah, you just followed my instructions and came out with a cake. You know what I mean? And some people are into that. And I would say if you're into that, go with a guide.
Yeah, 100%. If
Go-
you want that information, you go to a
Yeah,
guide.
exactly. If you want that information, you go to a guide. That's why they're there. They're there to help somebody who normally couldn't catch a fish on that river because they don't have the knowledge. That's the whole point of a guide. The guide extends his knowledge and is kind of a steward of the river and kind of teaches you how to fish that area. And hopefully, if they're a good guide, they also kind of teach you how to respect that area. You know what I mean? Like they teach you, Ryan or someone like that, not going to let you bonk Chinook that's past its time or whatever on the sole duck because there's not that many Chinook running back to the sole duck.
Yep.
Though the state defines, because the state has to, basically the state has to allow the maximum amount of retention possible while maintaining the run. So there might be a 1 fish limit on Chinook that day, but is it necessarily the right thing to do to bonk a Chinook? Probably not. So if you've got a good guide, hopefully they tell you that. Hopefully they say, hey, although we can, keep a Chinook, I'd prefer that we didn't keep a Chinook today. The returns are kind of low. And I would implore you to listen to that guide because he's the one who lives there. And hopefully you are hiring a guide who lives in the state. Like you're not hiring some Montana bro who's out in the Olympic Peninsula guiding for the wintertime.
Who has zero knowledge.
Yeah. Well, and some of them do have knowledge. Some of them come every winter and guide the Olympic Peninsula, But my problem with that is that you don't care if the Olympic Peninsula goes to shit. Like if steelhead stop returning to the Olympic Peninsula, does Joe Blow, Montana guide, really care that much? Probably not. He probably just goes and gets his Oregon out-of-state license and starts guiding for hatchery steelhead in Oregon. And then when Oregon shits the bed, he goes up to British Columbia and gets his gets his guide license from a lodge in Alaska or wherever it is. He's making a buck, Whereas somebody like Jim Kerr or Lucas Choate, who we had on before, you live in Washington State. You live in the greater Puget Sound area, and you're like, hey, I care if the Olympic Peninsula stops having steelhead. That's my favorite place in the world to go steelhead fish. Like, I'd do anything to keep steelhead coming back to the Olympic Peninsula, And so, for me, that matters a lot more. But that said, yeah, if you want, spots and what flies to use and all that stuff, hire a guide, man. Like, that's not what the fly shop's there for. The fly shop's there to help you figure out gear questions. The fly shop is there to help you out fishing spots when you just start out. If you're just starting out and you're like, hey, I've got no idea where to go fish for cutthroat. I don't know how to fish for cutthroat. I don't know anything about cutthroat out in the Puget Sound. I'm going to head down to Puget Sound Fly Company. And you know what? Puget Sound Fly Company is going to do a great job. They're going to tell you, hey, go to Purdy, go to Olalla, kind of some general spots. And this is what you want to fish. And you want this intermediate line. And you want these bait fish patterns. And you're looking for rocky. And we'll even tell you, oh, you're looking for rocky beaches with a freshwater outlet. From there, if you want to jump on Google Maps and you want to do all this research and you want to put in this time to go to these super secret spots that you found on Google Maps where there's freshwater dumping in and you found a parking lot and you had to hike a mile to it, more power to you. That's badass.
100%.
You know what I mean? Like that you are putting in the sweat equity to earn those fish. You know what I mean? And I don't want to sound pretentious by saying earn those fish, but you kind of are. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
You're earning that fish. And guiding's kind of a funny thing in that way because you're not necessarily earning that fish. You're kind of buying your way into that knowledge. You're paying somebody else for that knowledge, which is kind of a moral dilemma while also being, important because it does fast track somebody's knowledge and it does make, I think the justification for guiding, at least in my opinion, is that at the end of the day, that guide is creating new stewards for that fishery, right? So if I take you out steelhead fishing and you've never been steelhead fishing and you hook up with 2 steelhead, you now realize, whoa, this is an awesome fishery. Steelhead fishing is the shit. Like, it's super cool. These fish are absolutely amazing. I really care about what happens to the Olympic. But even though you live in Colorado or whatever, but you're coming out every winter, you now care what happens to the Olympic Peninsula. You're like, I loved my fishing trip on the Olympic Peninsula. And even though you're only caring about it because you're like, hey, I want to go fish it more, you still care. And you still make those votes against the Wainuchi Dam, or you make those votes to, add funding to the WDFW or whatever it is, or even you're just offering up your money to guides who, the Forks Guide Association does an amazing job of protecting that watershed. So no matter what you're doing, if you're spending money at local fly shops in the Washington area or wherever you're going fishing, if you're going up to Alaska, you're spending money at Alaska fly shops or wherever it is. If you're spending money and doing that stuff, you're supporting that fishery, that whole system. Mm-hmm. So I think that's kind of the saving grace. That's kind of the reason why you might give up a spot to somebody. But I understand where you're coming from, where you're like, hey, I really like my secret fishing spot. And I don't want to show up and see 8 dudes there, fishing it and wrecking my hole. So, I mean,
Yep.
there's definitely kind of a happy medium. It's tough, too, when it's your buddy's spot. Your buddy showed you the secret spot, and then somebody comes to you, and you're like, well, normally I would tell this guy. This guy's my buddy. Normally I'd tell him my secret spot. But this isn't my secret spot. This is my buddy's secret spot. I can't tell you,
Well, that's 100% no-go. Like, you don't
that
tell
is
your
the
buddy's
ultimate
spot
no-go.
whatsoever.
Yeah, if I tell Stu my secret spot, even though I am totally best buddies with Matt, and I'd tell him any of my secret spots, Stu better not tell Matt my secret spot,
right?
or I'm not telling Stu next time where my secret spot is, because I'm like, who else did he tell? I only know that he told Matt because Matt's best buddies with me, and he went, hey man, why didn't you tell me about that secret spot? Yeah, you don't want to be telling, you got to be kind of picky choosy about who you tell your secret spot to. Otherwise, next time you show up to go fish, there's 8 dudes in your spot, and they're like, hey, I'm Stu's buddy.
Well, I think it's happened to everyone. You tell your buddy, like, oh yeah, this is why I limited out, and then,
that's the way that you learn. You learn who's got a big mouth because you went, hey, don't tell anyone. That's how it always starts,
Yep.
right? You're like, hey, don't tell anyone, but I hooked 4 fish here yesterday, this exact spot on this fly. And then your buddy goes and he sends you a photo or whatever, because you couldn't go that Wednesday or whatever. He sends you a photo of his 3 fish or whatever, and you're like, sweet, it is the spot. That's the secret spot. But then you find out that your buddy told 4 other dudes, Because next time you go, there's 4 dudes in there who you've never seen before, and you're like, "Hey, how did you guys find out about this?" And they're like, "Oh, your buddy told us, like blah blah blah. He told me all about this spot. He made this Instagram post and made a pinpoint exactly where it is on his map and everything."
Yeah. Yep. Yep.
That one drives you crazy too. If you tell your buddy a secret spot and then you're scrolling through Instagram and he's got a photo and there's like, a bridge or something like that behind it that's super obvious where it is. And he posts a photo of his fish and they're like right behind him's this bridge. And you're like, dude, all you had to do was angle the camera down. So all anybody saw was the water. Like, why would you do this to me?
Yep.
You're like, dude, you blew that spot. And not even intentionally, maybe. They were just took their photo, And you're like, what are you doing? Like, what is this, amateur hour? Like, hey, save my spot, man.
Yeah, at that point, it's like, don't even take pictures. Take one just facing
down. Yeah, dude, that's if you're trying to hide a spot, the pro tip for everybody, if you're trying to hide a spot, you just take a photo facing straight down at the water of a fish basically in the water. You know what I mean? Like, just maybe the back of it is barely out of the water, and then you take that photo. Nobody's ever going to know where you were at if you got a photo of a water with a cutthroat, That's the super. And if you want to be in the photo, you just get down on one knee into the water, and your buddy takes a photo from up above, so that way it only shows the water. Pretty simple to take photos like that to not blow your secret fishing spot.
Yep. Oh, definitely. And it's always a hard decision too. Do I tell that person?
Yeah, right.
Or do I not?
That's a tough call because you're like, can I get away with telling this dude about my secret fishing hole, or is he gonna blow it up? And you don't really know until you tell him one. So you might, like, I've been known to, you tell people semi-secret spots where you're like, you might not know about this one. I'll tell you about this one,
Well, and that goes big time, especially seeing cutthroat fishing, because people don't
8
realize
million spots.
They can travel everywhere. They can jump. They can follow tides. And there's so many spots they can find that nobody's gonna be like, oh, go here during this tide. Instead, they'll be like, oh, go to Olala.
Yeah. Yep. There is just so many places in Puget Sound that hold fish.
Yeah.
And there's spots that, like, if 4 dudes a week fished it, that spot would be done.
Yep.
You wouldn't catch anything there. So there's plenty of spots that just can't handle fishing pressure because it's maybe like 100-yard stretch that you're fishing, and there might be 50 fish. So if me and Matt are the only guys who go fish it, and we're really responsible about it, right? Like, we only fish it once a month or once every other month. We go, oh, I really want to fish that little, point or whatever, and we only fish it that often. Is it that big of a deal that we fish that point? No, not at all.
There's so many others.
Because we're catch and release and you're not doing anything. You know what I mean? But if Matt goes and makes an Instagram post and he goes, hey, this is the point, this is where it's at, and now we still only fish it once a month, but 18 other guys also only fish it once a month, so now 18 days a month are fished, now you got a bit of a problem. Even that is like borderline, like that'd probably be okay. But if now 30 dudes fish it and there's a guy fishing it every single day, now you got a real problem.
Mm-hmm.
Now, even though, maybe 1 in every 20 fish die from catch and release fishing, you only had 50 fish. You're fishing it 30 days a month, you're fishing it every single day. By the end of the year, there's not going to be many fish left there.
Nope.
Yeah.
Nope.
So there's definitely 2 parts to it. There's, hey, I'm trying to save my fishery for myself, kind of a selfish aspect to it where you're like, I want this to be my little fishing spot. But there's also kind of a conservation aspect to it. There's just spots that can handle large amounts of fishing pressure where you can kind of pimp it out, I would say, and say, hey, everybody should go fish the lower Yakima. It's a great fishery. It can handle a lot of people fishing it. Like, the fishing's not going to decline because everybody's going down the Yakima catch and release fishing. It's not. You know what I mean? If anything, it gets better because more people care about the fishing, and more people care about the fish, and they do habitat improvements, and they do all these things to help benefit them because they join their TU or whatever, and then they start fixing up the Yakima.
Yep.
So there, it's actually beneficial. But if I tell you about a tiny little creek that's in my backyard and everybody starts fishing it, that fishery is going to decline really quick. So there is some stewardship to it, but there's also, like I said, there's definitely a stigma where you're like, hey, I want this fishery for myself. But what do you say to people who are like, hey, man, how is anybody supposed to get started in this fishing thing if you're not giving up the good spots? Everybody's just going to be catching little dinkers once every 2 months, and they're never going to get into it. What do you tell that guy?
Well, I mean, when it comes to that, you're like, well, how about you should get out, try some of these spots, kind of get your casting down, things like that. And I think that comes with that is also, hey, I'm going to explore this area. Like, I only caught so many fish at Titlow that last week. You know what? Maybe I'm going to go to the Narrows Park.
That's such a funny one to me, is that I noticed at the fly shop, there are a lot of people who fish the exact same spot every time that they go fishing.
Yeah. Yep. They don't move around.
Crazy to me. I couldn't imagine that. I couldn't imagine always going to Titlow, like, regardless of conditions. I'm just like, Titlow's my spot. I know where there's holding, rocks that they hold behind, and I'm just going to fish those until I catch fish. To me, that's just insane. Like, I would go crazy. That's why I got into fly fishing, is because it's more active.
Well, I mean,
I don't want to do that,
When we go sea run cutthroat fishing,
dude, we'll stop by like 4 or 5 spots in a day. Yeah, exactly. We're all about moving. You fish that for 45 minutes, and you're like, I didn't catch anything. Let's move on. That's kind of my personality, though. I'm kind of like ADHD. Like,
get bored like instantly.
Dude,
you're like 5 catch. You're like, yeah,
I know.
No fish. I'll be up there by the car, guys.
Yeah, exactly, dude. I am. I'm just not a person who's like, all right, let's wait it out. Maybe it'll turn on later. That's just not. It's not me. I'm gonna move on.
Well, and standing in one spot is the worst of all things to be doing.
Look, I won't name the exact person who does this, but a certain skier buddy of ours, right? We kind of got him into swinging flies for steelhead. I probably met my buddy Bennett, right? I probably met him, I don't even know, like 6 years ago now. Yeah, probably 6 years ago now. And I had my hide drift boat at the time, and I was like, hey, man. I met him. I might have been still in high school. That's crazy to think about. Yeah, so I was still in high school. I think I was in my senior year. I think I was still at my internship. And Bennett was going to the University of Puget Sound. And, dude, there's no young people who come in the fly shop. So you notice them immediately. Some of them, you're like, I don't want to hang out with you if you paid me $1 million. And other ones, you're like, hey, man, you're pretty cool. So I met Bennett, and I was like, hey, man, you want to go fish, basically, right? And Bennett had been out swinging flies on the coast before. And, dude, we got out there and pull off. I anchor up, and we're about to go fish a run. I think that was like his first time fishing for steelhead out of a boat. Because I know it was his first time nymphing for him. And they just stood there. They didn't move down the run at all. They were just like planted up and just swinging.
Yeah, and it's just gonna run into my fly.
Yeah,
it's not. It'll come.
Because traditionally, like, right, if you're the guy rowing the boat, you let the other two dudes kind of go down first, and then you kind of sweep up the back. Basically, you're the last guy in the run, and you're kind of working your way behind them. And that first hole we get into, and they go down below me, and they're just standing there, and I'm like, oh. And when I swing flies, like, I move. Matt complains about it. Like, I'm like, one swing 8 steps, one swing 8 steps, one swing 8 steps. Like, I'm getting down this run, and either something's gonna be really aggressive and it's gonna bite, or it's not gonna happen, and I'm gonna move on. Which is, to me, I'm like, hey, I got a boat for a reason. I'm covering water, man. I'm not sitting here all day. Like, that's why I'm not bank fishing. It's different if you're bank fishing, because then it's a pain to move spots altogether. So you're gonna, like, methodically work through this one run. But anyway, so yeah, so they were just standing there, and I'm like, oh, this is brutal. So yeah, so for me, I'm all about moving. So when we go fish the Sound, Matt knows we might fish like 40 minutes at a spot, and if nothing's going on, we're moving on. We're putting the rods on the front of my truck, and we're moving to my next spot. So yeah, so I mean, to me, even when I started though, like even when I was still in high school and I just started the fishing club, and dude, I was always looking at Google Maps trying to find a new spot to go fish or something. You know what I mean? Like I'm always like, oh, look at this spot, an hour and a half out on the Key Peninsula. Oh, this is crazy. Onyx Maps is a great resource too for people looking for stuff like that. That shows you public land access, shows you who owns the land and where public land is, even if it's not listed. Meaning like it doesn't say that it's a park or something like that. It tells you that it's public land. So that's a really great one to kind of learn where you can and can't go, basically. So I definitely use that a fair amount too. But I'm always looking for spots, and I think that's kind of part of fly fishing. Like you're into fly fishing, not because it's easier than gear fishing, because it's not. It's way harder. So it's kind of a part of it. Like you got to kind of struggle, you know what I mean? Like when you start out, and that might be kind of a backwards way to look at it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it might be the wrong way to look at it, but it's definitely how I look at it. Like I'm like, you should struggle. Like when I first started out, it probably took me like, I don't even know, like 10 trips out in the Sound probably when I was like 16 going out there fly fishing my butt off just in the dumbest spots. Like you're like, why were you thinking that there were fish holding here? You know what I mean? Like this barren wasteland of rocks, and I'm just like casting out as far as I can, stripping it back in, fishing these awful looking little heavy patterns hanging up on the bottom all the time. But that's kind of part of it. Like you got to kind of push through that to get to the other side. That's why when you meet a guy like a Nil who like just knows he's a fishy dude, like that's why you respect that guy, because you're like, I respect that guy because he pushed through, and like found the other side. And so you're like, this guy knows his stuff, like, and you can fast track that learning by hiring a guide. Like I've got no issue with that, obviously, or getting casting lessons or whatever it is, but there's parts of it that you got to kind of learn yourself.
Yep.
Yeah, that's at least my feeling, and I'm sure some people would disagree, and they'd be like, no, you should be able to, knowledge should just be widely spread throughout through Washington Fly Fishing Forum or whatever it is. And I'll agree with that. I think certain things should be widely spread in order to create more interest in the sport, because it's not a very big sport. We don't draw in that much people, really. It's kind of a very selective. You're taking fishing, which is already kind of a selective group of people that enjoy fishing, and you're narrowing it way, way down into fly fishing. I would say like I don't remember who. Someone was telling me that like out of Shimano sales, it's like 1/10 of sales comes down to their Loomis fly rods. So in the grand scheme of things, fly fishing is a pretty small niche group of people. So I'll agree. There definitely is a lot of space where you're like, we need to get more people into fly fishing. But at the same time, they got to be the right people. You know what I mean? You got to be into fly fishing, because fly fishing is kind of a weird thing. It's a lot like bow hunting. It's kind of a sufferfest, really. If you're looking to just catch numbers of fish and you're looking for the easiest way to do it, go throw some bait, man, because you're gonna catch a lot of fish fishing bait. But if you're looking for a really fun way and you kind of actually enjoy struggling and being shitty at something, which seems to be across the board, most people who fly fish do kind of, for whatever reason, enjoy struggling, then fly fishing is the way to go. So I think that there is a certain amount of knowledge that should be shared that helps people get started and helps people get into the sport. But there's also certain things that maybe shouldn't be shared as easily. There's some things where, hey, you gotta kind of put the time in to learn how to cast. You gotta put the time in to learn where the fish hold and how to read water and how to do these things. A guide or lessons or YouTube videos can help you with that, but you got to put the time in yourself to learn your fishery.
And a lot of people have this thing that they don't want to ask questions.
Yeah, ask questions.
And that's the biggest thing.
Yeah.
It's like, ask questions. We can break it down for you. You know, I mean, when it comes to
dude,
that.
all the time in the fly shop, I used to bust out a piece of paper, and if you don't know how to nymph, ask me.
Right?
I'll show you. I'll draw out a diagram. I'll draw the little indicator on a piece of paper, draw the fly line, and show you how to mend.
Yeah, we'll even break up the rods and everything. And this is the setup.
All
this is how you
the
need to do
time,
it.
dude.
Yep.
All the time. Yeah. Go to if you don't know something, go to your local fly shop. If it's a rigging question or something like that, ask. They are more than happy to teach you how to mend. They're more than happy to teach you how to do whatever it is. If you don't understand how to do it, they'll teach you. What fly shops, I would say for the most part, don't appreciate is people coming in and going, where do I need to go right now to catch 18 steelhead or whatever? Give me the spot. Give me the spot right now. Where were you at yesterday? Give me your spot now. I deserve it because I'm shopping here. That's not appreciated, right? Because you're like, look, dude, this is my job. So my job is to help you with gear, right? My job is to help you get set up and catch fish. My job isn't to give you all my secret spots.
And that's where guiding comes into play.
Yep.
You hire a guide. With that, you're hiring a guide for knowledge. When I pay the $600 to get on the river with a guide,
Yep.
I'm sitting there. I'm not paying for, I guess you are paying for, the fishing aspect of it.
Yeah, you're paying for the boat and that guy's time, but yeah, a lot
knowledge.
of you're paying for knowledge because that guy is spending tons of time on the water and he knows how to catch fish there.
And ask questions to him all day long. That's his job, is to answer your
100%.
questions.
If you are not asking questions while you're fishing with a guide, then I think you're kind of squandering your time with him.
Yep, 100% agree.
And if you're upfront and honest with the guide about what you're doing, they're cool with it, man.
Yeah,
you know what I mean? Like if
you
you're
want
like,
to learn?
yeah, if you're like, hey, look, I'm gonna hire you to fish today or whatever, right? But I'm here for 3 days. I want to know, you tip the guy decent, you tip him, a normal tip, right? For like winter steelhead, which is like $500 to $600 a day. You tip him like $50 a dude. There's 2 dudes in the boat. You tip him basically $100. That's a pretty normal tip. Tip the guy $100 and say, hey man, where would you go tomorrow? Like, we're still here for 2 more days. We want to swing or we want to go walk in a nymph. Where would you go? That dude's going to tell you. He's not going to go, well, you should hire me again. He's going to go, hey, thanks for your business. I appreciate that you guys hired me at all. You're keeping me in business. I'm trying to keep this fishery open. We're all working for the same goals here, basically. And you had the respect to tip me.
Right.
You know what I mean?
Yep.
Like, you understand that this is valuable knowledge. I'm going to share it with you now. You know what I mean? And that, I get it. If you barely scrape by enough money to get the actual guide himself for the time, I get it. You know what I mean? It's kind of a pain in the ass to tip somebody, $100 or whatever to figure out your fishing spot the next 2 days. But hey, try walking in on your own and catching them. You know what I mean? You might go I know a hell of a lot of guys who would come into the shop who went 2 years and didn't catch a single steelhead.
Mm-hmm.
So knowledge is valuable, and same is true anywhere. If you're going to fish the Yakima, that knowledge is a little bit easier to come by than steelhead fishing is, because it takes a little bit less time to get good at, takes a little bit less time to figure out the fishery, you know what I mean? But that knowledge is still valuable. You want to know where to go on the Yakima or what to fish the next 2 days, or but if you pay for a guide and you're fishing, you should be asking those questions. Hey, what fly are you throwing on? Hey, what bugs are those coming off the water? Hey, what's the good flows to be fishing at? Hey, why are we fishing the bank here and not fishing that rock structure over there? Oh, because the flows are really high right now and it's pushing all the fish to the outside edge. Like, they'll answer those questions for you, and that's how you gain the knowledge. And if you go into a fly shop and you want some knowledge, when you're buying flies or whatever, I would say don't go in and just ask for knowledge and then just leave. Support that business. You know what I mean? Because if you don't support that business, then they're not there next time. And then you're sitting there going, oh, I'm so sad that the fly shop went out of business. I supported them all the time. I bought 2 flies last year from them. You know what I mean? Like, you didn't really support the business. You bought your stuff. Think about that stuff, right? Like, when you're buying your fly rod online because it's $10 cheaper and you saved on tax or whatever it is, think about the fact that, hey, if the fly shop goes out of business, I don't have anybody telling me where to go find my fish. I don't have anybody telling me, spooling up my line. I don't have anybody doing any of these things. Keep that stuff in mind. You know, sure, you got a little bit better of a deal because you went online and you ordered from Oregon or wherever where they don't have sales tax. But your local fishing knowledge is now gone because that fly shop went out of business because everybody was trying to save $10. So, you know, there's a happy medium where I'm not telling you to go buy, you know, a rod that's $100 more because it's on, you know what I mean? Because it's on from the local fly shop instead of online. But what's knowledge worth to you?
That's true. And you know what? A lot of shop stuff will work with you when it comes to 100%. Stuff like that.
If you're like, hey, look, a nil or whatever. Hey, look, man, they got this online for like $10 cheaper, man. Can you work with me? Can you price match? Maybe they don't come to the exact cost or whatever, or maybe they don't have that exact same product, but maybe they have something really similar. Or maybe, more importantly, in my opinion, maybe they go, hey, look, man, I get it. That's a great deal, right? But I cast those rods. They're not very good. Like, I wouldn't carry them here. They asked me to carry them. I wouldn't carry them. I don't like the rods. So, yeah, it's a great deal price-wise, but I think they're really shitty rods.
Well,
right?
They usually end up coming back and, like, I need that rod, actually. And you're
Dude,
like...
So many times people come in and they're like, I pieced together this spay fishing setup or whatever from these online retailers. I bought this OPST fly line. I bought this and this and this and this, right? And that's not a knock against OPST. That just happens to be like one that people do a lot if they buy stuff online. So they bought like this OPST fly line and this whatever company fly rod and this whatever company reel. And you're like, actually, you didn't buy running line. So you got backing and then you just got a Skagit head. You have no sink tips. Your fly rod is not a spay rod or whatever, or it is a spay rod, right? It's like a 7-weight spay rod, and they actually bought the OPST line for a 7-weight single hand line or whatever, stuff like that all the time. And you're like, dude, if you had come in and talked to me, you wouldn't be buying half the stuff that you're buying right now. You'd have come in cheaper because you would have bought the right stuff, and your experience would be 100 times better because I would have worked with you and I would have been like, hey, are you a fast caster? Are you a slow caster? Oh, let's figure out this fly line. What are you looking to fish for? Oh, you want a nymph? Well, you don't want the OPST line. You want this switch chucker that'll help you nymph, or you want the Rio switch line, or you want this 9-weight anadromous, because really it's better if you take a 7-weight switch and you 2-bump it with a single hand fly line that's meant for nymphing. You know what I mean? Like, there's insight in gear in particular that fly shops have that you don't get from online.
No.
And that's the whole point, right? That's the sharing of knowledge that fly shops are there for. Like, yeah, they'll help you with your spots too, but they're sharing knowledge with you.
Right.
The amount of stuff, having the right setup will make such a difference in terms of how much you actually enjoy the fishing.
Oh, yeah. Yep.
100%.
I mean, clunky. You see a lot of that, just clunky stuff, and they're like,
Dude,
I don't understand why I'm casting.
I
and
remember,
you're like,
I remember when I first started swinging with you that first day, and Matt busted out like a 10-foot leader on the end of his sink tip. And you had like a 15-foot sink tip on. And I was like, what the hell is this? And just took it all off and re-rigged him all right. And I was like, dude, fish this. And like after like the first hole, you were like, dude, I am getting such amazing turnover right now. And I was like, of course you are. You were fishing like a 10-foot leader, dude, with like an 8-pound fly and like a 15-foot sink tip. And that used to be the thing. Like, that used to be what people were doing. They were fishing 15-foot sink tips. You know what I mean? But it's not necessarily the best or the easiest way to do it, you know?
Nope.
And, you know, just switching out little things like that, you know, make a huge difference. And that's what you're paying for at the fly shop.
Yeah.
You're paying for that knowledge. That dude is an expert in his local fisheries. right? That's reasonably and you know, maybe not every fly shop is perfect. Maybe the guy's not an expert in every fishery for the area, but they probably got somebody there who knows what they're talking about.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Like
Yep.
you might talk to somebody at the fly shop who's like, hey, you know what, man? You know, because you ask a question, right? You're like, hey, talk to me about spay fishing, right? And Johnny at the counter might not know about spay fishing, but you asked him, right? Instead of not asking him because you're like, oh, that guy doesn't know anything about spay fishing. So, but you ask him, and then he goes, hey, I don't know anything about spay fishing. But you know who does? Bob over there. Hey, Bob, you've been spay fishing for 20 years. You know what I mean? Like they're pretty upfront about
Yes.
like,
Yep.
hey, I don't know about that. But you know who does is this other guy. And you might have never talked to Bob before. And now Bob's going to give you the lowdown on your spay setup. And he knows his stuff really good because you asked. If you go into a fly shop and you assume that you know more than the people who do it for a living, you're probably not going to get much out of the fly shop. You know what I mean?
No.
It's always been funny to me. That's the only place I've ever seen that somebody would go into and expect to know more than the guy working there. Like, I don't go to the mechanic, and when the mechanic goes, hey, man, your catalytic converter's all messed up, dude, I don't go, yeah, I don't think so. I think it's my exhaust. So I watched a YouTube video on it, and the YouTube video told me it's my exhaust. So I don't think you know anything. I'm moving on.
Well,
right?
it's a YouTube. YouTube is a killer for people.
It is and it isn't.
It's good for knowledge-wise.
It's good and it's bad because there's some really good knowledge out there. There's some videos where you're like, this is fantastic. This guy did an amazing job of explaining this. He told them, you know, how to set it up, and he did a great job. And then there's other ones that you watch, and you're like, dude, this guy doesn't know his ass from a hole in the ground, and he has no idea what he's talking about. And then you look on the video, and there's like 1 million viewers or whatever, and you're like, oh no, 1 million people just thought that was the truth, and it couldn't be further from the truth.
Yeah.
And which gives, you know what I mean? It gives it a bad name. People are like, hey, I don't know if this guy knows the truth. I thought that YouTube guy knew the truth, and I was casting that setup, and it sucked. Or vice versa. They're like, yeah, no, I only listen to this YouTube guy. And they're casting a shitty setup. And you're like, dude, if you just listen to me for 2 seconds and just try what I'm saying, you're going to realize that the dude that you've been listening to doesn't know anything about spay fishing or whatever. And you're going to be a lot happier because your setup's going to be way easier to fish.
Right.
So
it'll be dialed.
Yeah, dude. So information should free flow, but you got to ask the right people. Like, you can't be just hanging out on the Washington fly fishing forum and listening to the dude who is an accountant 5 days a week and he gets out to fish once every other week. You should be listening to the dude who works at the fly shop 5 days a week, and on his weekends he goes fly fishing. And you're like, wow, you spent 7 days a week all about fly fishing. Talking about fly fishing, learning about fly fishing, talking to the reps about what the next fly fishing thing that's coming out is, talking to the reps and casting these fly rods and casting all these lines, and you're making an educated decision. You're not making a decision based off of what you think or in theory. Oh, I feel like this line would be too heavy on this rod. You cast it because you can. You can just take whatever rod you want from the fly shop and cast it out in the grass or out in the parking lot and feel it.
Yep.
And we encourage you to make that same decision. You can come down to the fly shop or any fly shop, any decent fly shop, and cast the rods.
Yeah, I mean,
Cast
that's the biggest thing.
Find out. Because I might like a really fast action sage rod, and you might like a really slow action glass rod. And it's not that one of us is right or wrong, but if you share that information with me when you come in to buy a rod from me, and you're like, I really like slow glass action rods, blah, 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 then I'm not going to show you a Sage X. I'm going to show you the Reddington Butter Stick or whatever, the super slow action fiberglass rod.
Mm-hmm.
And together, as long as you're sharing your opinions and what you actually know, and you're very honest and upfront with me, then we're going to come to a good decision and we're going to get you the right stuff. Whereas if you go online and you just look up a YouTube video They didn't ask you any questions. They didn't ask you anything. And they go, Sage X, best fly rod ever, blah, 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 blah. Fish this line on it. And you buy that whole setup online, and you probably bought the wrong fly line for it, and you're not going to like it. You know what I mean? I might love that setup. I might be like, yeah, this is the best setup. I agree with you. But you might be like, this is the worst setup I've ever cast. I can't feel anything. But then you go to a fly shop and you're like, dude, I bought this setup and it sucks because I can't feel anything. And I'm going to be like, well, what line do you have on it? Oh, you don't have a bumped line. You've got a dead-on 5-weight, like a pretty light 5-weight. You know what I mean? And I'm like, of course you hate this setup. You just told me you want a really slow action. Like, you might want to, you'd probably be better off with a heavy 6-weight on this. That'll slow this rod down, and then you might like it. So we go out and we cast a 6-weight, and you're like, oh, it still feels pretty stiff to me. I might throw a 7-weight on there, and then you're like, this is great.
Yep.
This is the best setup I've ever cast. It's super powerful, like but it's still slow, like a fiberglass rod. And then I'd be like, yeah, because you came to me and you told me what you needed, and I helped you get there. If you just bought it online, you didn't ask any of those questions, and you bought a 5-weight that's dead on for a 5-weight rod, but it's not dead on for you because you like a different feeling. You know what I mean? So knowledge is key, man. You got to ask people. If you don't ask questions, you're not going to get the answers.
Nope.
Don't be afraid to ask questions when you go into the fly shop. I think that's it for today. Thanks so much for listening, everyone. We'll see you next week.